Hello and welcome to What the Luxe with me, Fred Moore.
And me, Anand Sharma.
Together we lead Matter Reform, a design consultancy specialising in brand, digital experience and content. And this is a podcast that calls time on tired ideas of luxury.
Alongside industry luminaries and thought leaders, we explore what truly defines category-leading products and services. Ben, it's wonderful to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining. We've known each other in various guises for maybe 15, 20 years. And you've had various guises from Financier to rewilder to conservationist. Can you start by just talking through your personal journey and what's bred your passion for the thing that you now do and champion so publicly and so well?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. And in fact, I reconnected with you because I wanted the help of you and your team at Matter Reform in making a short film to persuade the people of Scotland that their landscapes are terribly depleted. You know, that those great vistas, those kind of amazing landscapes that people visit when they go on their summer holidays and post their pictures on Instagram are actually devoid of the trees and scrub and wildflowers and wildlife that should be there. And just because you can see a long way, you know, just because you've got poor mobile reception doesn't necessarily mean that it's wild. And I wanted to make a little video that we could put out virally. And remember, we made that film, and it was good. It was a little 60-second cartoon film about how Scotland really could be. It could be one of the most ecologically vibrant landscapes in Britain. And that's the kind of thing that I've always dreamed about since I was a child. That was my obsession. I've got a bunch of letters in a drawer in a desk at my mother's house where I grew up. I had quite a sort of formal relationship with my father. He was much older than me. He died when he was 63, when I was 15. And I adored him, and he was kind of whirlwind character that kind of appeared in a huge overcoat and a Russian hat, surrounded by people and all kinds of things happening. And the rooms that we never went into in our house were sort of lit up for a few days when he arrived. But fundamentally, I didn't really know him like you or I know our children. And I used to write letters to him, and the letters are in the drawer in that desk. And the topics I was writing, age 9, 10, 11 years old, writing about in those letters to my father were all about wildlife. You know, could we trap wild boar at your place in France, and could they be brought to England somehow? Why aren't there wild boar in Britain? You know, what are you doing in that place in Mexico with ocelots? You know, the ocelots have disappeared from Western Mexico. How's the reintroduction going? Now, I was fascinated by this idea that we've lost so much. You know, that we've been impoverished as a society in the loss of ecosystems, landscapes, wildlife. And the greatest thrill I could have was to see an abundance of wildlife, to see dolphins. I mean, for anyone, for any child, but especially me, to see dolphins from a boat, you know, to see great flocks of birds. You know, I spent my childhood in the garden where I grew up in Richmond, West London, putting up bird boxes and putting out bird feeders and trying to dig out ponds that never worked because it's sandy soil in the west of London. And I just was mesmerized by nature and by wildlife. And I think all children are. I think in some people that love of the non-human world falls dormant as they grow into adult life. In my case, it remained front and center. You know, there's a writer called E.O. Wilson, one of the great naturalists ever, and he coined the term biophilia to describe the innate love that all human beings have for the non-human world. It's why we love our dog. You know, it's why we feel happy when we go out on a sunny day into the park. It's when we hear bird song, when we see wildflowers. There is a love that is there, and he writes beautifully about how even in those where the biophilia seems to be dormant, you know, the longing is still there. You know, they still want a beachfront hotel room. They still want to crowd into the park when the sun comes out. They still will pay twice for an apartment that overlooks the park versus one that doesn't. You know, in my case, I grew up among adults for whom it was completely normal to love wildlife and nature. And my brother-in-law's Imran Khan. After my father died, he was the sort of alpha male inspiration in my life. My older sister's husband. And he was passionately in love with nature. I remember walking with him, and he'd say, "Oh, thank Allah for the gift of fragrance," or "Stop talking for a moment and just listen to the bird song, listen to this beautiful world we live in." And my brother Zach, of course, who was later environment minister, and now works with the Bezos Earth Fund. It was a huge influence on me. So I grew up surrounded by adults who love nature, and this has colored my entire life, a love of nature and wildlife.
When was it that you revisited that the childish fascination with wildlife and brought it into your business life?
I said my father was a businessman and a tycoon, and he died when I was a teenager and left me with a sense of responsibility to kind of somehow emulate his success, to be a businessman. And I remember the things that made him proud. Well, when I went out on the golf course looking for birds and wildlife, I would always come back with pockets full or bags full of lost golf balls, and I would polish them up and package them up in boxes that we reclaimed from the bins on each tee. And we put a little bell on the gate at the end of my mother's garden where I grew up, and it was on the fourth, or the green of the fourth hole on the private golf course, and the little bell would ring when someone saw the golf balls positioned in their boxes on a table, and I'd tear over in my shorts and sell the boxes of golf balls. I made quite a lot of money doing this over years. My whole childhood I spent dealing golf balls. So he loved that and wanted me to be commercial, and I probably do have some kind of commercial instinct. And so the compromise I reached with myself when I started working was I would work in green investment. And what that really meant was renewable energy. So we're talking early 2000s. I set up a venture capital fund, and we looked at renewable energy and water infrastructure and water purification and waste and the kind of emerging green industrial revolution, which revolved around using resources more efficiently, moving from a linear model where you extract stuff from the earth, use it once and chuck it away, to a more circular model. That for me was kind of a compromise. Does it set the soul on fire? Working in green industries, I'm not sure it did, but I enjoyed the commerce of it and the hustle and the bustle and getting people to invest in our fund and finding businesses to invest in, and we did that with moderate success. And the business that I built is quite substantial now. It's a green investment firm. I set up a subsequent green investment firm, and the things that we predicted have come to pass. There's never been a category of infrastructure that has received as much investment in as short a period of time as solar power. It's demonstrably the best and the cheapest source of power that humanity's ever known. So this idea of a green industrial revolution was real, and it matters, and I believe in it. But my love was always, weekends spent with my children outdoors. And my love was always nature and wildlife. And on the side, I was always working as a kind of communicator and a campaigner for more wildlife and nature orientated things, in philanthropy and so on.
It's a bit of a side question actually, but what's your favorite source of power? You said that you believe that solar is a bright future.
Yeah, it's hard to compete with solar anywhere. If you're 3/4 of the world's population, solar is by far the cheapest source of electricity. And so I think solar is the most flexible, and I don't think it'll be all solar. I believe in wind. The cost curve on wind is similar to that on solar, and then storage. If you can store the electricity that you're generating, you get greater flexibility in the way it's then distributed and consumed. Then you've got a system that is like a flywheel. It doesn't need inputs. So I think renewables are a massively important moment in the development and growth of human civilization. So I'd say wind and solar make best sense. I don't like dams and hydro. I think dams are a curse because people describe dams as green energy, but straitjacketing and blocking up our rivers with dams is a real crime against nature and has terrible, terrible consequences. And in fact, it's probably not even that green in a pure carbon sense, because the buildup of material at the bottom of the reservoir behind the dam emits methane, which is a much more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And wildlife is meant to move up and down the rivers. The great sturgeon, and when European settlers first arrived in the east coast of North America, they described shoals of sturgeon that were 18-20 foot long in the Potomac River, which flows through Washington today. These massive sturgeon and huge runs of salmon. One of the main sources of human protein were the salmon and the trout that came out of the sea to breed in these rivers. And of course, those salmon die out and get eaten by ospreys and bears, and the phosphates and the nitrates from their bodies then fertilize the forest. So this perfect connectivity of life is broken by dams. So you asked me what my favorite power is, a source of electricity is, and it's got to be solar and wind. And my least favorite, I think, alongside coal, would be hydroelectric. I think they're a curse in the landscape. And there's a burgeoning dam removal movement. California just removed 4 massive dams on the Klamath River, the world's largest ever dam removal. And it's a story of, it's a miraculous story, decades of trying to get this done. And eventually the agreement was struck between the federal government, the state government, the local Native American tribes, who were desperate for the dams to come down. Their whole culture was founded upon salmon, and there'd been no salmon for 100 years. And 10 days after these dams came down, in a project which cost more than $400 million, 10 days later, they found the first spawning salmon up near the Oregon border in the reservation where the Indians live.
I kind of agree. I actually read a really good book called There Are Rivers in the Sky when I was on holiday, which is an amazing commentary on the memory of water. And, it looks at sort of, the Tigris over the ages, and that plots 4 stories that run in parallel that all follow the sort of river. It's a really, really book worth reading.
And the Tigris and the Euphrates meet in southern Iraq and form a wetland, which is known as the Mesopotamian marshes, probably 15,000 square kilometers in extent during the flooded season. And the marsh Arabs that live there are really the same as the ancient Sumerians from 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And this is one of the world's most important wetlands. It's most likely it describes the Garden of Eden, this landscape, and that it's a string of dams on the Euphrates in particular that have strangled that wetland. And it's Saddam blocked the water completely and killed the wetland, and then the marsh Arabs, after the fall of Saddam, blew up all the little dams, and they blew up all the little weirs and allowed the water back in, and it's partially restored. And even as it is today, it's an ecological marvel. I love the image of these marsh Arabs with their dynamite sticks blowing up the dams and the water flooding back in and the wading birds coming back, the fish coming back. But I think this is the task of our time, is to rebuild the natural fabric of the world. I think for every possible reason, it's everything that we have. It is our everything. And I think rebuilding it, it offers tremendous, tremendous joy. And that is what I now focus all my time on.
Rewilding as a concept is something very close to your heart. Can you just define or explain what rewilding actually is for the people listening?
Yeah, it's a great term, rewilding, and for me, it's a term which can be very broadly used. I think if you have a window box on the 33rd floor of a high-rise and you sow the window box with native wildflowers, and then enjoy the butterflies coming to pollinate those wildflowers, or maybe some goldfinches coming to eat the seeds in the autumn, I think that's rewilding. You've rewilded your window box. I think it's about restoring, as far as is possible, given the circumstances, natural processes, the natural processes on which nature depends. So restoring those motors, restoring to the maximum possible extent the natural processes that allow nature to heal itself, can be described as rewilding. And it's sort of a controversial term in some parts of the world, because it's taken to mean the clearance of people from the landscape. In a new round of clearances, of course, in Britain and Ireland, the indigenous people were swept from the landscapes of Wales and Ireland and Scotland and the English uplands in order to make way for sheep monocultures. Those monocultures of sheep that we see in Wales today, those utterly bare, windswept, natureless hills that stretch for miles and miles and miles across 88% of Wales, but it's just as bad in the English uplands. Go to the Lake District. You find more nature in Primrose Hill, more wildlife in Primrose Hill, London, than you will in the Lake District, because it's been stripped by sheep. And so people have that memory of being swept from the land with their animals, their cattle, their pigs, and nature also swept for them to make way for sheep. And the negative interpretation of rewilding is that somehow it's a perpetuation of that clearance, that we want wild land without people. And it's simply not true, because natural processes include those that are human-led. And the native cattle of the British indigenous way of farming, for millennia, were a central cog in the machine. those cattle, they graze and they browse and they trample and they create these extraordinary shape-shifting, dynamic woodland mosaics. Think of the wildest place you've ever visited in Europe. It probably wasn't a dark forest. A dark forest is what happens when you don't have wildlife eating some of the baby trees. It's a place without sunlight, and it's a place without much wildlife. The really rich, dynamic places are the places that have sunlight reaching the floor, and you've got big open-grown trees and then pockets of scrub and flowers and areas of open grass and wildlife moving through it. Well, the cattle are an essential ingredient. So we need the farming communities and we need their cattle if we're going to rewild the landscapes of the British uplands. So I think the people are an important part of the mix. And so there is a controversy about use of the term rewilding. You meet farming clusters who say, who are doing wonderful things to restore nature, switching away from sheep, bringing back pigs, cattle, the landscape's coming back to life. Oh, we're not rewilding. Oh, no, we're not, absolutely not. They shy away from the term. I came across the term in a book written by George Monbiot, who's a great writer. The book's called Feral.
You sent it to me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, actually.
I might well have done. And I always knew instinctively that our landscapes were desperately impoverished and that wildlife is sort of not something that happens here in Britain. You want wildlife? Go to the European continent, go further afield to Africa or India. But we can't really have that here, because. And George Monbiot's book, Feral, kind of, removed the wool from my eyes and made me see that actually we don't have to settle for lifeless landscapes. That those reasons they're all crap. And I'd always dreamed of, as a child, of having a piece of land of my own. And I was lucky enough to inherit some money. And so the first thing I did after getting married, having some children, was to buy myself a piece of land in Somerset. And it was a pretty knackered former dairy farm, that very traditional English lattice work of suspiciously neon green fields and neatly cropped hedges and a few crows and not much wildlife, albeit the previous owners had been lovely people and quite sensitive. So the patch that I bought was much better than the surrounding landscape. We have this control freak relationship with nature where every square inch must be productive and must be managed and tidied. And the solution to everything in Britain is to kill stuff, flail stuff, drain it, ditch it, dredge it, and control it. We have a relationship with nature which is about extraction and subjugation. And it's difficult to stand up against that, especially if you're in your 20s and you're an outsider and the neighbours expect that you farm and the land agent who advises you expects that you farm. And we all know people who've been lucky enough to inherit or buy a few hundred acres somewhere. And it's low-grade farmland like mine in Somerset. We're grade 5 out of 5, so the lowest category of farmland. And just to give a moment of context, 85% of the food produced in this country comes from just 20% of the land, which is the grade 1 and 2 farmland, mostly in East Anglia. The least productive 20% of the land, according to the National Food Strategy Report 2021, produces less than 1% of the food. So the idea that I was making any impact whatsoever on national food security was nonsense. And I spent all my time in the little corners of the farm where we had built a pond or where we'd let some trees grow or whatever. And then we had a disaster in July 2019. So my oldest daughter, Iris, was killed in an accident on the farm. So messing around on a Polaris farm vehicle, there were kind of a 6-seater thing with a truck bed at the back that we drive stuff around and we take the family off on picnics, and stockmen would use to round up the cows, and a slow, heavy black thing. She managed, with a friend sitting in the passenger seat, messing around, things she'd been driving all her life, to turn it over on top of herself. And there was no one there to hear, the screams for help from her friend. I once read a book by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Chronicle of a Death Foretold, in which a young man's death is foretold by one seemingly tiny event after the next, which culminated in a foretold and unavoidable death. And this was the case here, where one thing after the next could have been just slightly different and she'd have been fine, but it fell perfectly across her neck and she died. And the darkness descended like nothing I'd ever known. Anyone who's lost someone close, and especially a child, will know that it's the first thought that hits you is, how do I survive this? How do I go on living? And if you have other children, I had a young wife and people who depend upon me, that was not going to be a choice. And I found myself in a state of surprise in those early days to find the world still beautiful. I thought, how do I live How do I ever find any joy or any light in anything ever again? And yet there were just moments in the darkness where the light shone through, and those were moments when I was holding a cup of tea and the birds were gathering around. Or thank God it was summer. I discovered that if I went off on my own and swam in the pond on the bend of a river at the bottom of the valley, that I would just for a moment feel better. I'd curl into a ball and sink as deep as I could, this kind of refuge in that water, and then I would come up, pop out, and the rays of the sun through the foliage of the trees above my head, and that gentle hum of nature all around me, the dragonflies, and sort of indifferent but profoundly benevolent in some way, they sort of held me, and I felt comforted. I mean, I went down the hill and swam literally 8-10 times a day. It was the only thing that made me feel momentarily better. Being outside in nature, sitting just staring at the kind of minute interactions, little things eating each other beneath the water, and just little bugs flying around, and big herons flying over my head. And I began to understand that this love of nature that I'd always had was more than just a hobby. I'd sat at dinners, my mother had hosted, and some nice aunt or godmother would say, "Oh, you're the one that you're the one that likes nature, aren't you?" As if it was like stamp collecting. And I sort of knew at the time that was a kind of absurd question. It's, do you eat food? Do you breathe air? Nature is everything, isn't it? But still, I wouldn't have thought of nature in terms of a calling or a yearning. I wouldn't have had any kind of spiritual or religious connotation to that part of my life. And in those very, very bleak, difficult moments, in the months and in all the time since I lost my daughter, who was a star, she was a star, and I was so young when I had her. She was only 21 years younger than me. She was as much little sister as she was daughter. It's an unsurvivable, unacceptable event happened to us. A loss that is unfathomable. And the only thing that allowed me to come back into the world and feel alive and purposeful and joyful was nature. And I just dismantled the farm immediately. I thought, why am I hiding down by the pond? Why do I need to have my farm like the Battle of the Somme, mud in winter and concrete in the summer? We're losing money every year with all these cows and sheep. Why do I need to do this? This is not the landscape that we're in. Was only farmed this way for the last 100 years. These were manorial wastes, royal hunting chase land, Selwood Forest. It was a landscape that was for people to access, to cut turf and collect honey and collect fruit and nuts and run their cattle and their pigs. It was like common land that was stolen from the people in a series of enclosures acts in the early 19th century. It was not deemed fit for farming, so why do we need to farm it in this way? So I dismantled the farm, and we got a tractor in, and we ripped out barbed wire fencing and opened up gaps in the hedges and ripped out field drains and filled in ditches and built ponds and just let nature reclaim it. And that was the source of all my solace during that time. And I now have 6 neighbors doing the same. So we have several thousand acres now of wild woodland pasture mosaics re-emerging, and you can just about make out the old field shapes. And beavers have moved back into the valley and have built strings of dams along the little streams and creeks that look like Japanese rice terraces, and the light floods in where they've felled trees in order to derive building material from their trunks, and the land is just awash with the color of wildflowers. And we have hockey stick recovery and 16,000% increase in amphibians in just a few years, 6 years. And it's a love letter to my Iris, really, because she would have loved what's happening at our place in Somerset. And it's given me more joy than anything I've done in my life, rebuilding nature there. And we even have some cows back now, because they are a keystone species. So we have some old English longhorns free roaming, eat what they want, sleep where they want, and go where they want.
Thank you for sharing that. What is luxury to you?
For me, the ultimate luxury is to have space of my own from wider society with the people I love most. I love a commune. My place in Somerset is like a little commune, and I'll be extended family there, siblings and nieces and nephews and closest friends and my children in my perfect world for a few days or longer. living together, eating together, playing and walking together, cooking together, eating delicious food. So much the better if the food has come from our own productivity there. We still have a very productive market garden that provides all the fruit and veg for my wife Jemima's restaurant in London. We harvest wild deer. I'm not much of a hunter myself, but there's a man with a big moustache called Derek who humanely comes and takes deer off the land. And in the absence of wolves, that's a necessary thing. So for me, luxury is family, community, space, time spent in nature, delicious food. I think, therefore, when it comes to travel, it's quite hard to find those ingredients. So I think there is a market opportunity in creating those kind of experiences for people in a travel sense. Where can I go and wake up and have fresh coffee around a fire outside whilst listening to chickens crowing on a nearby farmyard, and know that I'm going to see eagles swooping above my head, and I might get the chance to swim in a pond or a lake or a river. Where's a rural retreat in the hills, of kind of central Japan, or I think that those kind of visceral experiences surrounded by family, for me, are the ultimate luxury. And some brands make an attempt at providing those things.
Yeah. Funnily enough, Fred, actually, who runs Matter of Form with me, has just come back from Wildland in Scotland.
So I know Anders Poulsen and his wife Anna very well, and of course they suffered a terrible tragedy just a few months before I did, and they're close friends of mine, and he has been a rewilding pioneer at huge scale and building an ecotourism model around it. And for me, that's real luxury, to go and stay in one of those lodges and wake up in a truly wild landscape and eating delicious food off that land. That's luxury. And I love products that last. Things that are made from really good quality materials. A really good jacket that I imagine I might still be wearing in 30 or 40 years. My father's suits from the 1950s, made by a tailor called Caracciani in Milan. They're still there. They don't fit me. He was bigger than me, but my brother wears them. I think my sons will most likely wear them. They're things that last forever. His shoes, made by Lob, which were handmade, and he wore them for decades. They're immaculate. So I think things made from good materials, for which you feel grateful and which last forever, that is tremendous luxury.
And people forget about the sustainability of durability. Everyone's very focused on supply chain, but actually, if you make things well and they last longer, and you decrease the churn, consumerist churn, that's the best thing that you can possibly have as a kickback.
And I think products which are the result of human creativity and love are very, very special. Things which are not machine made. I think the reason why we love nature is because it's a physical manifestation of something beyond, some greater mystery, which is better described in music or in silence than in words. And I think we're drawn to it, especially in times of need, because of that. And I think that human creativity is an upwelling from the same place, be it music or be it art, or be it the cobbler who made with love my father's shoes. They're beautiful things. Or the tailor that made those suits. Or my wife Jemima collecting stuff from the vegetable garden and making a delicious lunch, kind of a beautiful temporal piece of art that just fantastic, which then gets eaten and devoured and disappears, no sooner than she's made it. I think that human creativity draws from a special place, and I think that is why we love luxury.
What do you think brands can do that goes beyond sort of transactional support? A lot of the people who listen to this podcast are either in the world of luxury, which is aspiration making, but also a large subset of the listeners are in the world of luxury travel, hospitality. Often they're going to far-flung places and building luxury, or bringing affluent audiences to places that perhaps there's a duty of care both to the local community but also to the local environment that needs to be enacted, but also an opportunity to tell a story to those who then carry enough gravity to help do something about that that exist in those local environments.
I can't remember who it was that said that good brands don't have customers, they have fans. And that really resonates with me, because there are things that I buy from companies that I love and I'm loyal to, and those brands have real reach. The brands that I love and trust, can access me in a way that other brands can't, the way that other organizations can't. I'm sort of in touch consciously with certain brands. And I think, therefore, that puts those brands in a position subliminally to add value to my life in the form of their messaging. And messaging around nature, I think, is about the best marketing tool that there is, because what's more photogenic, what's more beautiful, what's more viscerally rewarding than nature? Who doesn't stop and it takes their breath away when they see an unbelievable rainbow over a city that they love? Or a huge flock of birds kind of forming a murmuration like a genie in the sky above them, those starlings in Rome, for example. Those are breathtaking sights. Or dolphins, massive pods of dolphins, which you now see off the west coast of America, the likes of which haven't been seen for more than a century. You see hundreds and hundreds of dolphins in these superpods. The nature, and specifically the recovery of natural abundance and vibrancy, are deeply, powerfully and viscerally rewarding things. And so I think that brands can engage with those things in an authentic way and can produce some amazing messaging for their loyal customers in the process. And I'm certainly more drawn to brands that seem to me to be aligned with my values around nature and that play to my love of nature. So I think companies can engage in a number of different ways through their supply chains. They can avoid the harm that their supply chain does and work to move their business to a more circular approach and just be more respectful of the resources that they use and the way that they extract and use those things. But also just proactively engaging in ecosystem restoration. It's not expensive, and most companies have some kind of marketing and philanthropic corporate social responsibility program. Whether it's sport fields in deprived areas, we'll add nature to that mix. Buy biodiversity credits, commit to buying some biodiversity credits, and then report the hell out of the wonderful results that those biodiversity credits have delivered.
Yeah. I mean, something that I think is interesting about just the term rewilding, for example, is it's got energy within it. The term feels like it's an energetic term. It feels proactive and not perhaps as defensive and back foot and losing battle as sustainability can sometimes feel when companies talk about it. And, what you just described is visceral and exciting, and it's about the raw attitude of nature and life and things that, you have to be deeply numb to not feel something around.
I've heard it said that the environmental movement kind of has flipped that famous quote by Martin Luther King on its head, and the environmental movement has a nightmare it wants to tell you about. And we must fight to stop the nightmare. And thank God that there are lots of people out there devoting their lives to stopping the nightmare. But rewilding is the exact opposite. It paints a picture of a much better, wilder, richer, more fulfilling future. And I think that's why it's such an appealing notion for people. And nature is this unending force. You stop managing. If you have a garden, just stop managing it for a while and see what happens. Just be overrun with wildness. Look next time you walk down an urban street, look at all the little plants and weeds coming up through the pavement. Nature wants to recover, and so rewilding is about harnessing that power of nature.
I think that story of rebirth is not told enough, and hence it can feel like a losing battle.
Yeah, I know, it's true. That's why I've set up a podcast called Rewilding the World, to tell these stories of rebirth and renewal, because some of the stories are just extraordinary. I mean, take the golden steppes of Kazakhstan, the Altan Dala, an area the size of Germany, in which wildlife was machine gunned out of existence under the USSR, and the land for a brief time was converted to failed industrial farms. Well, the golden steppe is recovering, and the 50,000 Saiga antelope in the year 1995 are now 3 million. They've reintroduced wild asses, the ancestor of wild donkeys, of domestic donkeys. There are camels and leopards and wolves and all kinds of wildlife coming back on this vast plain. It's like a Central Asian Serengeti. Now, the stories of restoration happening or the eastern side of North America. In 1900, from North Florida up to Quebec, the whole of the eastern seaboard up through New England was only 20% forest cover. It's now 75%. Now, there is rewilding happening all over the place, and I think companies can grab it and help it by restoring natural processes, by giving money through the purchase of biodiversity credits, for example, or by integrating restoration activities in their business model. And I think they can derive massive mileage from it, because this is really joyful stuff.
What led you then to set up the Conservation Collective?
So we've set up this conservation collective, which has 21 locally focused environment foundations around the world. The Mallorca Environment Foundation, the Cyprus Environment Foundation, Barbados, the Lamu coast of Kenya. They're all over the place. We're launching this quarter in Antigua and Barbuda, in Avon and the Cotswolds, in England, in Mauritius. And each one has its local base of supporters, and they may support with money or time or whatever. Local businesses get involved. And the first one we set up is now giving out $1 million a year on one island. And the whole network has raised and distributed approaching £20 million since 2020, since Iris died. So this conservation collective is becoming a very useful source of funding and other support for people at the grassroots who are doing amazing things to rebuild nature in their place.
I think it's interesting how you empower people who do have a connection to that local environment to do things, and the relationship between how you provide the funding, but then how you empower those on the ground to design the initiatives and roll them out. Can you just talk to that a little bit? Because I think it's important to express.
I mean, you're really talking about two categories of people in the same place. You've got those who have resources or time or some other ability to add value and to add fuel to local initiatives, but they don't really know how or who to partner with. And then you have another category of people who are those at the grassroots doing amazing things. It might be a marine biologist in Cyprus who's devoted her life to studying and loving monk seals, critically endangered Mediterranean monk seals, and she knows how to restore monk seals in Cyprus, but she has a full-time job and no resources. And if you go to someone like that and say, we're gonna provide you with financial support and also other support in the form of introductions and connections and just be a group of cheerleaders around you, in order for you to take time off work and complete the study that you need to complete and take it to politicians and go on the local TV channels and get Cyprus to become proud of its monk seals and get Cyprus government to make an investment in what needs doing to restore monk seals, that is a very, very powerful combination. Now, and often they don't need much to turbocharge their work. And these people are everywhere, in every geography, in every town, in every community. There are people who are trying to rid the community of single-use plastics, or to clean up a wetland, or to restore a particular species, or to bring together local farm clusters to eliminate the use of agricultural chemicals. In Minorca, for example, the island has a particular substructure that is permeable to agricultural chemicals. And as a result, modern agriculture has poisoned the water supply. So you can only drink bottled water in Minorca. And the agricultural chemicals are poisoning the surrounding marine environment. And there is one enlightened farmer who the Minorca Environment Foundation is supporting in bringing together an island-wide cluster of farmers who are going organic and helping identify the obstacles, both cultural and economic and practical as well, and helping them to transition away from chemical farming on their land. So this is the kind of person that if you can empower them with a bit of funding and with other kinds of support, and miracles happen. So the Conservation Collective is about raising money in a bunch of places for redistributing to the most effective local initiatives of that kind. And it really is powerful. It's the two holy grails of the environment movement. Number one, how do you get more money? Because most people don't give to environmental work.
I think there's a framing problem with that a lot of the time. How do you take an issue or a theme and turn it into something people care about? And I don't think it's often a case of how you position and market something, almost.
Well, localizing the problem and its solutions has been our way of bringing it closer to the people whose support we want to secure. So you go to some a wealthy Cypriot businessman and talk to them about the Amazon rainforest, and it's just on a long list of other things that they're being spoken to about. But talk to them about monk seals in Cyprus and the island of their birth, and an opportunity for them to play a part in rebuilding nature in that place that they love. And suddenly the whole family's there, and at the dinners and coughing up some money and volunteering and so on. So we're building a movement that is finding new funding for environmental work. And the second holy grail is getting that money to the grassroots, because it's often very small groups of individuals in a particular place that are best placed to deliver meaningful change. And as these things grow, these local foundations, then local companies get involved, and we've got partnerships with Hublot watches and with Depeche Mode, the band, who gave us $1.8 million for dissemination through our network of local foundations on the topic of single-use plastics. And we got funding from Coldplay and from Edmiston Boats, and a whole bunch of different companies and brands have started to. So the Norwegian Retailers Association gave €500,000 to our foundation in Sri Lanka, to work on mangroves there. So it's growing a philanthropic movement, and philanthropy really does play an important part in all of this. But I think a much bigger question is, how do we get society, corporations, government, society, to value in practical economic terms what nature does for us? Now, I get George Monbiot's philosophical argument that nature is beyond valuing. How do you value friendship? How do you value love? How do you value the solace that I felt in nature in Somerset during the darkest weeks and months of my life? Those things are incalculably valuable or beyond value. But that being said, we have been valuing in money terms what nature does for us. We've been valuing it at zero in all economic decision-making, industrial decision-making. And so I think we need to start valuing nature for what it does for us. So if you've got a community on the edge of Dartmoor that floods every winter and their lives are made a misery every time it rains, and if you rewild the hillsides above them on Dartmoor, and so the flooding stops, well, there is an economic value that can be calculated to that natural flood mitigation service that nature is providing. Similarly, that new sponge that you've built, that new wild ecosystem that collects water and holds it back, is providing that community and others with clean water. Again, that's something that has a value. We know what it costs to clean water and provide it to people's homes. And so there is a growing movement around the world to value nature in a rational economic sense. And that is mobilizing corporate funding, for example, for nature recovery. There are things like the carbon credits market, or the biodiversity credits market, or the natural flood management or nutrient neutrality and clean water markets. These things are now real, and many tens of billions of pounds are now flowing into nature for the first time.
Ben, we always ask our guests the same 4 questions in outro. And the first is, what are the things that slightly annoy you about the industry that you're in?
Conservation is full of scientist bureaucrats who are overwhelmed with caution, and they have very rigid ideas of what should be and what was once and how to go about putting things right, and their ambitions are limited by that, and they seek to limit the ambitions of others. So the greatest opponents, for example, to the return of beavers to Italy, which may not have been done by the book with particularly careful planning. The beavers may have been tipped out of a van onto the Tiber and other major Italian rivers without much thought, but it's been a blinding success, and beavers are ecological engineers like no other, and it's a triumph. And yet there is a bitter faction within conservation that resents how it was done. So I think the small-mindedness of conservation scientists is an issue.
Purity of process as opposed to just practically what's going to work and ultimately make a positive difference.
Yes, and aversion to any kind of risk-taking.
I suppose linked slightly to that, what concerns you most about the world that we're leaving our kids?
The loss of natural abundance. We use the term biodiversity a lot, which describes the number of different species in a particular ecosystem. And the world is waking up to the importance of biodiversity, and we are protecting a lot of species that would otherwise disappear. But what we don't talk enough about is bioabundance, that thing of seeing a massive cloud-darkening flock of birds, or fish leaping in all directions when a boat plows through an estuary. This thing of vast abundance of that which is otherwise quite common. And I think that we need to restore abundance. And at the moment, for the most part, we are losing abundance.
That's really food for thought. I've never thought about it like that, actually. The abundance of that which is common. If you had to give up your job tomorrow, what would you do?
I'd like to spend more time doing physical work outdoors in my happy place, which is Canwood in Somerset. My favourite way to spend an afternoon is to build a fire, put some deck chairs around it, boil some coffee, have my kids playing around, have a few of my family members, my wife, or whoever there with me, and those that are feeling energetic enough to join me in cutting brush and kind of woodland gardening and fulfilling the role of a beaver or a bison in the woods. Because some of the ecosystems that we're creating there have been established by us. We did plant some trees in the early days, and those need thinning and opening, and just interacting with the natural world could be a much bigger part of my life if I didn't have a job.
Yeah. But seeing as you do have a job, what are you working on that you're most excited about?
So with the king of rewilding in Britain is a guy called Charlie Burrell, who's established Knepp Wildland in Sussex, which is a huge 2,000 or 3,000 acre rewilding area around his family's ancestral castle, and it's staggering. You go there, and one guy said to me in my ear while we were standing listening to Charlie speak, he said, "It doesn't feel like England. It feels like Africa." And I said, no, England doesn't feel like England. This is how England's meant to be. You don't need to go to Africa to see these landscapes. Charlie Burrell and I have established a new business called Nattergal Limited. Nattergal, we've drawn inspiration from the Hans Christian Andersen stories of nightingales and renewal. And we've raised £40 million of equity finance, and we're seeking to rewild landscapes and seascapes at scale while generating a positive investment return for the investors who put up the 40 million by selling biodiversity credits to brands, or carbon credits, or natural flood management solutions to local authorities. The idea being that if we can make nature recovery an investable infrastructure asset class, then large investors will start to invest in nature in the same way that they invest in solar or student accommodation or care homes or roads or bridges, the other things that we need in society.
Just as an ancillary question, how do you think this country fare when it comes to some of the things that you've been talking about versus other countries in Europe and globally?
So we're probably one of the most intensively managed, highly developed, densely populated countries on the planet, certainly in Europe. Every square inch has been dominated by humanity. So if we can rewild here in a way that doesn't sweep people from the land, but in a way that delivers a diversity of income streams and breathes new life back into communities and societies, especially in our remoter landscapes, then I think it can be done anywhere. And we don't manufacture in this country stuff like we used to, but we do still export ideas. We're a country that if you go and work in Abu Dhabi and want to put your kids in school there, you'll put them into some kind of joint venture with an English private school. If you look at the statute books of Pakistan, you'll find great chunks have just been copied and pasted from the British statute books. We are exporters of know-how and ideas. And if we can show how equitably and economically to rewild landscapes in a way that benefits all of society, then the world will follow. So I think we're doing something very useful in this country. And the most important change was that made by Michael Gove with my help when I was on the board of DEFRA, which is to link all subsidies for landowners and farmers with stewardship and restoration of nature. We're the only rich world country that no longer provides unconditional subsidies to farming. The subsidies are all now pegged to some kind of delivery of public goods. And that's changing everything. Take the train out of any station, go north, south, east, west in England, because Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland haven't yet followed. And you'll see change. You'll see more flowers, you'll see more birds, you'll see rougher edges, fatter hedges, more ponds. And that's because the subsidies are now contingent upon farmers and landowners doing those things. So there is a lot of change happening in this country, and I think we're laying down a template that other countries can follow.
What would your advice be to brands when thinking about sustainability?
Find a way to participate in this big moment in human history, which is the moment of nature restoration. Do that through philanthropy and CSR. Do it through buying biodiversity credits. Do it through aiming to be nature positive as a business. Bring your staff on the journey. Provide opportunities for your loyal customers and your other staff and stakeholders to participate in the recovery of nature. Be at the front and center of this movement, because it's one of the most exciting things happening in the world today, and it will bring you great joy individually and collectively, and it will add tremendous value to your brand and your company.
Ben, we'll put a link to your podcast in the description for this podcast, which is fascinating. But that aside, can you bring to life how brands can work with you? What are the different, make it easy for the people listening to think about how they could sort of collaborate and work with the Conservation Collective?
So I think there's two things that I would want to talk to luxury brands about. On the one hand, there is this growing network of locally focused environment foundations under the umbrella of the Conservation Collective that is supporting some really special and exciting projects across so far 21 geographies. So collaborations with brands make a lot of sense for those foundations individually and for the Conservation Collective itself. And those can take all kinds of shapes and forms, but exploring those ideas as a kind of corporate philanthropy and corporate marketing, I think would be really good. And then I have this new venture, Nattergal Limited, with Charlie Burrell and others, where we're restoring ecosystems at scale. We've already bought 3 pieces of land, which are, for those who know New York, they're sort of each one between the size of 1 and 2 central parks. And on those pieces of land, we are restoring vibrant, dynamic nature governed by natural processes, all within reach of London. And we will be generating biodiversity credits. In other words, we'll be measuring the biodiversity recovery and tokenizing that recovery and that uplift in the form of credits, which can then be bought on a voluntary basis by brands. And Meta, for example, or GlaxoSmithKline are big buyers now of biodiversity credits. And it's a nascent market, and it's a measurable way to invest in nature recovery. So those are the 2 areas in which I think companies can get involved through kind of corporate philanthropy or through the purchase of biodiversity credits.
Great. Ben, thank you so much. That was fascinating, educational. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me on, Anand. It's been really fun.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for listening. This has been What the Luxe. You can find us on socials at Matter of Form, and drop us any questions or comments on Twitter using the hashtag #WhatTheLuxe. Or if you're a luxury brand looking for strategy and design that goes beyond the banal, get in touch via hello@matterofform.com and chat to one of our consultants.